Welcome to another episode of Peers Over Beers, your favorite digital and social evangelist podcast with your industry veteran hosts, Chris Tetzel. This podcast starts now.
Here we go. So welcome everyone to another Peers Over Beers. I'm Chris Tetzel and I have a special guest, Erica Moss. Erica, how are you? Why don't you do this? Introduce yourself, title, where you work, all that kind of stuff. Is that fair?
That sounds great, Chris.
Good.
I am Erica Moss. I am currently the principal marketing manager for community at HubSpot, which is a new role for me. Exciting times. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, I'm a community nerd. I eat, sleep, and breathe it. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
Awesome. Wow. That's a different role. A principal marketing manager of communities or whatever. That's interesting. I love it. What brought up that title?
It was a newer one for me as well, but I kind of like it because it sort of speaks to the leveling up of community, right? We kind of all started in this community manager role, but as we move into other parts of the business, we become very strategic. I think it makes sense. So I think we've seen a lot of diversity in the roles that are popping up in community. And for someone like me who's been in it for a while, that is wildly exciting.
It is wildly exciting. What is can you talk a little bit more about that role and kind of like what's so exciting about it? Because I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I think what appealed to me initially about it is that it kind of felt like I could choose my own adventure in terms of like the projects that I could chase after when I was in it. So we had like a few buckets, I guess, that we were going to have me focus on. So for example, Academy. That is a huge focus at HubSpot. Before I ever came to HubSpot, I heard about the Academy and how dynamic and wonderful these courses are and how many people were sort of like chasing those certifications, right? Like if you are in inbound, if you're in marketing, if you're in social media, like having that little like feather in your cap, that HubSpot certification meant a lot. So how do we activate those folks? How do we keep those folks excited about Academy and certifications throughout their journey? And so I knew that was going to be a big part of the bucket, but it's also about these other folks that we're trying to reach through HubSpot, right? And you and I talked a little bit about kind of micro communities and meeting people where they are, but I think that's going to be a big part of this role as well.
Yeah, I want to say a few things because I think the way Reltio, we have our community set up today is a very product centric, here's how you use the product, here's what you do.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important piece. And it goes very well with Academy support and even product specific, so I like that. And I'm intrigued because I've been trying to work with our Academy team in a big way or bigger way. I'm a one-person team at the moment, but that's going to have to change if we want to do all this stuff. But I do think there's huge opportunity there in Academy. Love that. Maybe we can dive into that a little. But
sure.
Well, there's such synergies, right? Like I had Allison Boudreau on. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's at Calix.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and so she leads both Academy and community, and they work together. And so there's just this huge connection there on those type of communities, right? So makes sense. And then two, though, which is a little bit more intriguing, just because I'm trying to embark on this journey, is kind of these micro communities that you're talking about. And for me, is there's kind of been this shift of thinking for me, and even there's a huge appetite at Reltio to kind of think bigger or differently when you think about who the community really is. When you think of community-led, I think of, bringing people in that aren't necessarily using your product. They could, but the topics that you cover within the community could be more, rather than talk about Reltio, talk about the space, that maybe Reltio is in, like master data management or data governance or data quality or, the data catalogs and how people are setting these up, what that looks like from scratch, what that looks like, and what is the security, what kind of problems are you trying to solve with that? And I, one of the rules that I started telling my leaders, like the leaders at Reltio that are going to be in this space, is when we start talking about it, the first rule of our little journey here is not to talk about Reltio, is to talk about the space that we play in, but more along the lines of the problems and business outcomes that these customers have at the end of the day. And that's where I think the bigger opportunity is from a community standpoint. Not to say that this technical community isn't important, because it's highly important to help with a bunch of stuff, but also how do you get the bigger picture?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking to the queen of like community of product. Like obviously prior to HubSpot, I was at Atlassian, and that was the meat and potatoes, right? Like so many products, ecosystem of humans who are interested in it, very Q&A based. But then we started making that transition, that evolution, right? And it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because you've published a few pieces of content, and you just kind of check that box. It's long-term. And so I think that's very much kind of our mindset at HubSpot too, to your point, like how do we make it bigger than us and create a space where all the cool kids want to hang out,
Absolutely. I think that, when I start thinking about how to do that, and I want your take, but I'll give you mine only to give you a chance to react and then give me your opinion. So the way I've kind of been thinking about this, and we won't talk about Academy today, but because I'm way more interested in this topic, and I think it's probably a potential love that you're going to have to adopt and probably want to go after. Today we have a Reltio Executive Council, which I'm head of, right? So it's our leaders within, like our CIOs, there's some CDOs, chief data officers, VPs of IT, VPs, and they really help kind of guide us with our roadmap and things like that. I'm sure you guys have done that at Atlassian, probably do that at HubSpot. But I also own our community space, so our online community space that we talked about. The thing is, when you start looking at the executive council, but you also look at influencers within the space, and not just influencers, but other companies that have chief data officers or CIOs or whatever. There's an opportunity to really start kind of getting those people engaged and involved, right? It could be through webinar programs, a webinar type program. It could be, Q&A webinar. It could be podcasts. It could be on-site kind of focus groups of 5, 10, 15 people. And, you have a speaker come up and then just guide the conversation. So there's literally 10 different things that you can go do to do that. And then from that funnel, this is what I would do. It's what I'm thinking about doing, is funnel those programs. You can't do them all, but you pick one or two that you can really do well. Funnel that and create content that helps with that. So if it's Q&A, those are easy, right? It's like you're talking to Chris Detzel, the moderator, and then the CIO of whatever, and then you have all these questions. Boom, you can push that out into a nice little blog, and then you can create quick hit videos that just says the question that, and makes it look pretty good. Podcast, you push it into podcast. I mean, there's a lot of shit that you can do at the end of the day, to really start. It's exactly what I do today, honestly, but I do it on the technical community. Like, why not do this shit at the higher level? You know what I mean? Like, this is where it's going to also make a huge impact. So that's my thinking. Any thoughts, concerns?
Yeah. When you said that, the word like flywheel just kind of popped into my brain. And I know that's kind of like a buzzword that a lot of different folks use for different situations, but that's how it works. That's how it builds. Like when I think of really great programs, I think of the Atlassian Authors Program, which was created and built by Bridget Sauer, my former colleague at Atlassian, who is brilliant, and I love her. But it was so simple, but it was so brilliant. So it's an authors program. You have to hit a certain level in the community to be invited into this, sort of membership. And then she would give a prompt every month. And sometimes the prompt had something to do with Atlassian products. Sometimes it didn't. But when you do that, you kind of open up the possibilities. You get folks thinking about things in different ways. She could then take the content that was being created by these folks back to the product teams and say like, hey, this is what we're hearing. This is what folks are saying. And yeah, you just kind of like snowball it in that way. And it, like, to your point, just becomes all of these different types of content, creates this feedback loop, and makes everyone happy. You know, it's really powerful.
Yeah, I think so. I think that Flywheel has been used for a long time. And I think that the first time I ever heard it was when I worked at Forrester Research from George Colony. He's talking about this flywheel, and I really didn't know what he was talking about at first. And then finally I was like, what is a flywheel? Well, it's a thing that's really hard to move, but once you start moving it slowly but surely, you know, it starts to move, and then it starts to go. You know, most people know what a flywheel is, but you know, I was just very naive and just didn't read a lot. So somebody had to explain it. My wife, I always have to ask her about some of these big words, like, what does that mean? Because I've never used that in a sentence.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
So, is that some of the things that you're thinking about? Like, I mean, look, you're really new at HubSpot. And so, you know, what do you feel like, you know, the potential is all over the place. So
yes,
and you've got to kind of hone in on that, you know, and focus in on, you know, something. What is that?
That's totally the challenge right now, because there is so much runway, there is so much possibility. So, you know, I don't want to dive into 20 different projects that I'm not doing particularly well. Like, I really want to see like what's going to have the most impact, and then sort of chase, you know, those 3 or 4 things. So again, Academy is definitely one of those bright, shiny opportunities, but we've got all these different, you know, humans who are in our community, right? And so I just want to really make sure that we're meeting them where they are, whether they're thinking about using HubSpot, have been loving it and using it for years, or again, folks who like have heard about HubSpot, think it's cool or whatever, but aren't necessarily using it, but want to be a part of something bigger, you know, the thought leadership stuff that we were referring to. So whether that is AMAs, whether that is, you know, virtual events where we're kind of bringing folks together under like topic-based meetups and sessions or what have you, like, that's what I kind of need to figure out, like what that special sauce is. But yeah, that's why it's like terrifying and exciting to be in this role right now, because the sky is truly the limit.
You're going to do amazing.
Thank you.
No, I really believe that. I think, you know, you'll get your hands on it and figure it out. Do you think, and so we might get a little bit tactical here, because, you know, sometimes I think tactics really help people to think, oh, what can I go do? All right, I have this event strategy, or I have this whatever strategy. As you kind of look at, well, let me give you a little thing my CEO said the other day, and I think this will kind of, I've been saying this the last couple of episodes, but love your take. So we hadn't asked me anything with our CTO and founder on the community, and all the questions came directly, and it was live. I love to do these things live because, you know, it gives people a chance to engage. But you get the questions beforehand, because the problem is you get a live session like that and nobody says anything. You get your CTO and founder on there. It's like, they didn't say anything, you know, so you just make it. And I did it, you know, I sent out a message to everybody on the community and probably got 20 plus questions and a lot. And then once you start getting those questions going, people will start, then it flows into the comments and everything else. And so, so anyways, we had maybe 105 or 10 people on the AMA, and 60% of those were employees. Remember, or look, we have a lot of new employees that are very interested in what Manish has to say, because he is the thought leader of all things data and management and that's, you know, but you know, 50 or so of those were you know, customers, partners, and prospects. And so, you know, so my CEO, you know, was like, hey, Chris, how many people are on there, and versus, you know, how many are employees and stuff like that. And I told him, so I said, it's this mix, and you know, it's pretty good. He goes, I see that. He goes, I see that differently. I was like, of course you do. And he goes, and it's a good. He gets you thinking, right? Like it's more of, it's too many employees, right? And he goes, community should be a marketing machine, right? And it should be having hundreds of events and thousands of non-employees showing up to these events. So I was like, All right.
Okay.
So the thought was, so I got a call with them that I had this week actually, and I said, "Hey, I'm not sure how to do that, so help me." That's the fun of it, Chris. That's kind of the fun of you not knowing how to do something, because you need to think. So you're really good at the things that and pushing and getting it done. He goes, "I love that about you, but how do you think outside of the box? And how do you think outside of the things that you're not used to doing? And I think that's what he wants." But it got me thinking about maybe it was more the tactical things, and where do you go first if you think of events, right? Like it's certainly for me that I'm really good at is virtual webinars,
Sure.
or whatever. So that's going to be one. But when you start looking at Atlassian, or you start looking at even like, I don't know if CMX. I mean, some of these folks have done a really good job of just giving them giving their users this kind of access, if you will, to allow them to go out and do events on their behalf, right? And I'm like, I want to go do that. How do I do that? I think it's like, how do I get people to have events on Reltio's behalf and that I don't have to be at every event? I'll go to some of them, just to kind of get it going and things like that. But any thoughts on how, how do you build something like that? Because I think there's a key and opportunity there.
How much time do we have? Like that was, kind of the bread and butter of what I did at Atlassian. And we were very privileged in that our events program kind of started organically, where we just had Atlassian enthusiasts, meeting in Virginia just to talk about best practices and to talk about our products. And so eventually we got smart and we're like, we should probably harness this, give these folks some resources, give these folks some attention, internally. And so that's when you see us kind of wrap a lot of process and whatnot around that program. But it's not easy because these folks are committing to doing these things outside of their 9 to 5. And when you're living in a global pandemic, you have so many competing priorities, so many other things that you could be doing with your time. Like as a community leader, or as someone who is, wrangling and helping these folks, you want to kind of do a delicate dance between providing them support, but like not asking too much of them. Yeah. And so we always kind of tried to strike that balance and make sure that sort of the perks and rewards that we were throwing their way, like reflected the value that they were bringing, because, to your point, they are in the wild, they're championing your brand, doing all of this work on your behalf. So like, what can we do to kind of make it worth their while? And I think you start, with your biggest champions. I think you look at your customer base and say, okay, who's super extroverted, who's already, sort of sounding the horn for us, and would this be a good fit for them? Would they glean any value out of that? And, like I said, make sure you've got a lot of support systems in place. Like you got to hand them the content. You got to give them some type of roadmap or like place to start with these things. Because if you just say like, hey, we want you to be an events leader, like have fun with it. Like, I don't know the outcome is going to be exactly what
it's kind of a process. Like, are you talking about like, all right, so we want you to become this events leader for us, and here's what we need you to do. It's like step 1, invite your friends. Step 2, we'll help with a place, or you can pick a place, maybe it's at your whatever. Step 3 is you want to make sure you have dinner or lunch or whatever. We'll help sponsor that. We'll give you some swag. And then is that what you mean, like by putting that process and spelling it out and just saying, here, are you interested?
That's 100% what I mean. And a big chunk of sort of that like resource, that toolkit at Atlassian was providing speakers from our internal teams, and sort of, me as the ambassador program manager being like the liaison there. So if someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I think my members really want to learn a little bit more about templates in Confluence. Like, who do you have on your side that is really energetic, is a product expert and can kind of speak to those nuances in the product. And so that was a way that we helped folks keep content very fresh and dynamic in some of these events. But the pivot to virtual events, when you are used to a very like healthy in-person program, was not an easy thing. And I think even when I left Atlassian, we were still trying to figure out what that looks like, because you can't just necessarily take something that used to happen in person and put it in a Zoom and expect to have it feel as magical or as impactful. And so
it's just not.
That was kind of the moving target. It's really difficult. Yeah.
I feel like, and I could be wrong, because there's a lot of different types of virtual events you can do, as you know better than I do, right? But, and I can promise you that because that's what you lived. But, to me, the most effective virtual events have been more of the, so again, this technical community is, we'll go deep in this product, we'll do these things, this thing's live. So if you have any questions, just pop them off. Chris Detzel will moderate it. I'll ask that speaker those questions and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from the company, but it needs to be somebody, right? Like better if it's actually a customer or something. But, and what I hear you say, well, you could also do, just virtual meetups, which I think if done right, those are kind of good, but I could do my own virtual meetup these days. I don't need Atlassian or Reltio, I just don't,
100%.
And that's a little harder, I think to do. Not to say I wouldn't do something like that, but, you might get 5 or 7 people, which might be enough, it's okay.
Yeah.
And then when I think of on-site events, I love that, and because that's what my thinking was. When I was at Forrester Research, what I used to do was, it was kind of nice because I'd have an analyst that was super smart. So I just picked a smart analyst that I knew that covered a particular topic, and say, Michelle, let's go see these 10 clients in 2 days. We'll fly to Sacramento. We'll fly to whatever. We'll also have a lunch and learn steak dinner, for all these people. 5-10 people show up, and boom, 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 boom. I could hit that. But, eventually I got tired, I can't. But that was effective. But then how do you turn that more into, once you do some of that, getting those people to do that shit, those customers and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, that's what it sounds like you sort of did to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like I said, it's so challenging to maintain that innovation and maintain that creativity. What I will say, the beauty of virtual events is that it sort of democratized who could attend what event. So before, if we were holding an in-person meeting at the, Denver, with the Denver crew, that meant only folks in Denver could show up if they were interested in that topic. But you take that virtual and it's like, okay, this event's happening in Denver, but I'm in New York, but like, I really want to hear that product expert speak or whatever. So I can just log in because it's, from a friendly time zone and
direct
just
access.
Do that. And so we did start to see a lot of like kind of cross-pollination in a way that we had never seen before, which was a wonderful knowledge sharing, type exercise. So that was definitely a positive that came out of the situation.
I feel like events are starting to open up. People are starting to. I mean, I think I've seen 4 or 5 of them just in the last that aren't virtual, just in the last couple of months. So that's a positive thing. So I think we can start doing some of that. I'm going to try to start maybe in September or August. You can't really do anything, but certainly September would be ideal, is to do 2 or 3 events that are just focused on a small group of 5 or 10 people. But you're right. I mean, if you have an expert doing that, I mean, now they have access. The way I kind of look at it today, and when I first got here, nobody had access to the product managers. Nobody had access to the PS team. Nobody had access to, these really smart people that knew the product inside and out, and community made that happen at the end of the day. Like, we had over 42 webinars in 1 year, which is, I did every single one of them, right? And so, and we went deep mostly into the product. We had some Ask Me Anythings with our CTO, and funny enough is my last webinar I did with the product manager, it just turned into an AMA. Like it was just people
Totally.
just wanted they want to go deep, but then they're like have all these questions about this core piece of the product. And I was like, it's great. I mean, some of the answers we didn't have all the answers, but it was like, I mean, this is great. I just start feeding the community that like I push the content back out, like I'll record it, clean it up, and just over time, how that goes with but I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts around the on-site stuff, because I feel like the virtual is here to stay forever, there's got to be some kind of that, and because the access and things, so there's that, which I feel like say I'm mastered, but I feel like I've got a handle on that. But the other stuff that people do want to meet, people do want to have these things, and so where do you start there? What do you do? I mean, maybe you guys are already doing some of that or thinking about it already, but
yeah, it's, hybrid is the name of the game right now. I think we saw that. I was kind of exiting Atlassian as they were getting ready to host their big user conference called Team. And it was kind of the best of both worlds, right? So we had kind of limited capacity in person, in Vegas for those folks who have been chomping at the bit for the past, 2 years or so to really meet their peers and their fellow leaders in person. And so we had that experience for them. I saw the pictures. It looked like it went swimmingly. So I think everyone had a great time. But then in tandem with that, you have kind of the digital programming. So you can get the keynotes online. For our leaders who were like kind of our ambassadors, our, Atlassian champions, we had some very specific content and programming that we were planning for them the week after Team. So a lot of our folks in EMEA and APAC, they like couldn't, make the trip to Vegas, but that doesn't mean that we should leave them, high and dry, like, sorry, best of luck to you. Like, no, we want to still create a personalized, tailored experience for you. And so that was kind of, obviously a learning process as we were building that. And that programming was a combination of like, to what we've been talking about here, like very specific product stuff, but some of it was just pure networking, a digital escape room, just stuff that's kind of like building blocks for them to maybe be in the room with folks that they haven't been privy to or had access to or hadn't had a chance to meet. And so that's what I think we're doing right now, kind of in tandem. I think Inbound for HubSpot is going to take kind of a similar hybrid approach. So it's fascinating to watch, right? It's a very interesting time to be doing what we're doing, especially if you touch, events in any way.
Yeah, I feel like when we do a big event, I'm going to be the center and focus on getting that together, which, I'm not the most organized person. So there'll have to be some organized people behind me to really kind of build the processes and everything else. I mean, it's going to be a team thing, right? It's not going to just be me, but
it's an all hands on deck thing. It is. Everyone in a room. And what Atlassian too was doing was kind of experimenting with regional events. So again, maybe you can't go to Vegas, but let's get the New York chapter, in a room. Let's, stream the keynote. Let's have a couple of speakers, and you still kind of like maintain that momentum and keep that sense of community, even if you can't go to the big, in-person celebration. So that was cool to see as well.
How do you kind of manage? So if you're doing these regional events, I mean, these people have day jobs that they have to go do like internally, and so how do you manage that? And just, it's like, hey dude, that's what we're doing for the next 2 months or month, week, 2 weeks, whatever it is.
It was a behemoth, but much like everything that touched community at Atlassian, we co-created everything with our leaders. And so when that idea kind of like first came to pass, we brought the chapter leaders in like from the jump, and we were like, this is what we're thinking. Does this make sense for you? Does this make sense for your chapter? Here's kind of like the resources that we can bring to the table. And a lot of the onus was on us to kind of work through the programming, booking the venue, making sure the tech was where it needed to be and all of that. But bringing them along for the ride and making sure that, it's a structure and a framework that's even going to work for, these individual chapters was paramount to its success for sure.
When you think, let's think of internal resources that it takes, to do these. So if you're getting PMs and those kind of people, to do this, I mean, again, they have day jobs that,
Totally.
and it takes a lot of time, obviously, from you, and then others to really. So I think events have to be a key kind of strategic focus, that is for the company, especially someone as big as Atlassian.
Yeah.
But there are more resources, I assume.
A
but
few
everybody,
more, yeah.
everybody has, issues with resources, right? It's just, it doesn't matter how big a company you are. What was that? How is that like? I mean, people just kind of assume, all right, well, that's what I got to do for the next 2 months is all this stuff. And then somebody's going to be managing it behind the scenes. Like Eric is going to be like, I got to have this person doing this. Oh my God, this thing's happening. I mean, I'm sure there's some crazy stories. Maybe you can't tell, but
yeah, crazy stories for sure. Atlassian has a wonderful events team that obviously, like, their entire North Star is team and setting up these regional events for success. But there was, like I said, certainly some onus on members of the community team to put this thing together. And if you know anything about event planning, you have to be really obsessed with the details. You have to be on top of deadlines. To your point, kind of wrangling those internal teammates and making sure that they see the value in it. I will say, on the whole, all internal folks at Atlassian, not all, I guess I can't speak for all of them, but many of them see the value in community. They love meeting folks face to face who are in these tools, every single day, because customer feedback was just paramount. And so community is obviously one of the best levers for that. We didn't have to twist many arms to get folks to participate virtually or, like I said, at these regional events. Like they were always really wonderful about that. But that's, an evergreen process, educating internal folks about why that's exciting, why they should care. And, obviously some are going to be more along for the ride than others, but that's on us to make sure we explain that.
What did I miss? Anything I missed around kind of this thought leadership events, kind of stuff that you wanted to talk about?
Oh gosh. I will say that it was really wonderful and fun to watch at Atlassian specifically, our leaders sort of rise to the occasion and get creative when it came to formats for these types of events, the type of humans that they were bringing in as speakers. For example, Fabian, one of my very beloved leaders that I used to work very closely with, he brought in a celebrity chef for one of his sessions, and she taught folks how to make this, wonderful dessert platter. And that format doesn't work for every chapter, right? I had kind of mentioned that to our New York chapter. I was like, oh, Fabian's over here doing this. And they're like, that sounds lovely, but that doesn't translate for us. Our folks are very technical and they want to show up and hear from someone, at Atlassian. They want to know how to level up. And so, I don't know, it was just really wonderful to see that creativity and that innovation. And I think that will obviously continue moving forward until we figure out what the silver bullet for this event
is. There really ever a silver bullet? I don't know, but well, that's interesting. So the chapters are just kind of these regionalized areas that would do virtual events, but sometimes on-site, but with COVID, not so many on-site. And
exactly.
So he brought into one of these chapters a virtual chef that taught them how to cook some stuff. Now, did y'all send out all the ingredients and all that stuff to these people, or how did that work?
That's a part of it too, is certainly in advance of the meeting, are we sending the folks, the supplies they need to actually recreate this at home? And so that's when budget certainly comes into play. When we were in person, we always gave folks a budget per person anyway. And so in a virtual setting, if you want to be creative and use that for a celebrity chef and their time and, sending out ingredients to folks, we were happy to pivot and be nimble, right along with them. So that's kind of how that played out. Yeah.
Jeez, I need somebody like that in my company so I can do some of this. This sounds fun. It sounds like, there's a lot of stickiness to that, right? When you think of a company kind of putting on these events, hosting these events and making it fun for your members, of the community, the users. and I love it. It sounds like you did an amazing job there.
I mean, we had a lot of fun along the way. It was certainly not without its challenges. Obviously, pre-pandemic, a lot of folks were seeing huge numbers at these in-person events, right? They're seeing 50 folks who are showing up for the pizza and the beer and the networking. But then when you kind of like remove that layer, in a virtual world, I would see our leaders getting very frustrated. They're like, we used to have 50 folks, but now maybe it's more like 20. And I think you mentioned this earlier, there is a lot of power in those like more intimate gatherings, right? You can really get into the nitty gritty, get into the weeds of stuff in a way that maybe you weren't able to when it was, so big and massive. And so that was, I think, part of our coaching with them, where I think they were worried that we were worried that maybe fewer humans were showing up, but that's not really what it's about. Really, it's about, making those connections, and keeping folks engaged and excited,
Numbers are always kind of, they're good to, hey, we had a lot of people, great, but what kind of intimacy is there with 80 people? It's a tough one, right?
Yes.
So I'm not saying numbers aren't important, but sometimes a gathering of 15 people, 20, is good because, or even less, 10 people, 15, because there's more of that, bond and relationships that you can start building. You want to just kind of hurry this up, and we want hundreds of people. Oh my God, thinking about, our company or whatever.
Yeah.
How did you, last thing, because I think this is important, because it came to my mind, is all these events, whether it's on-site chapter or virtual chapter kind of events, regionalized or on-site or whatever, what's kind of the key, metrics that you looked at? Obviously numbers is important. Okay, got that one, check. But is there anything else that you kind of looked at to say, hey, this gives us ROI? Did you look at leads? Then you'd send leads email? I don't know. How did that look?
Yeah, I will say we weren't looking specifically at like leads from these events. I think we do like to see is, are the same folks showing up to these events, or are we seeing new faces? That's kind of how you continue to build momentum around these programs, is like, I told my colleague about it because I had such a great time, and, now they're a regular. So I think both like retention, just like folks coming back, but are there new faces in the fold? And I think also in a virtual world, we kind of saw a ramp up on the number of events that these chapters were able to hold, right? Because when you're in person, you have to book a venue, you have to, get catering, you have to, make sure your speakers are showing up on time, and what have you. In a virtual world, there's a lot, it's a lot lighter lift. You just kind of have to make sure you have the Zoom, you want to prep your speakers and get any swag codes in advance and stuff like that, but a lot less overhead, a lot less, just being in the weeds of that kind of stuff. And so we saw a lot of chapters that ramped up just in the sheer like volume of events, which was wonderful to see. But we definitely saw an uptick there. And then, like I said, we were looking at, are we getting new faces? Are we growing the program, reaching new eyeballs, that kind of thing.
Got it. So retention is key, new faces, which is kind of like expansion.
Yeah, totally.
So, but I do think that's a key thing. I like that, is how do you, when the same people coming over and over to some of these events, which is key because that they're probably your advocates of, the product. 2 is, they're people persons, but, 3 is that they're the ones that could potentially expand their licenses or their, footprint within the business and everything else and things like that. So, that would be something I would keep an eye on, if I was the leader, is like, all right, well, what is their renewal now? Or what is their, how much they pay now? And what's the renewal later? Can we at least say community events, community has influenced that renewal, So, those are the kind of things I would kind of try to push for. It's hard to, in the beginning for any community, it's really hard to me to, one, how do we connect business systems together from community? How do we connect, when you think of marketing, what they care about is new pipeline. And so they're looking at all these digital events that are going on, these digital activities that are going on. And, how do I do the same with community, right?
Yes.
How do I do that same digital kind of stuff, connecting to say, hey, we're expanding the pipeline because community had a huge influence. Hey, we're customers buy more because they attended all these events and did all these things. We could at least prove that there's a huge influence that community brought. Not necessarily the reason, because there could be like multi-touch reasons that it happens, but those, you start getting into those kind of things, then community is going to live on forever.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's kind of I would say golden goose, but that's what we should aspire to do, is just make sure that we can build dashboards to show that we're affecting either leads, pipeline, expansion, all those things. I think all those things you said are important, but kind of as we had this first conversation at the very beginning, is people don't, you don't have a community just to hang out with people. It's not there's a business reason to do it. And we have to, as community leaders, in my opinion, make sure we connect some of those really business outcomes to our business and to the community so that we can stay successful. It's not easy, I promise you. I have a long ways to go myself, but I think it's important to keep that in mind and try to focus in on that,
Totally agree.
Erica, this has been great. I really appreciate you
I've
coming
had a
on.
great time.
I did. I mean, I always have a great time, and it's, I think I said this in the beginning. If I didn't say it, on the episode, I did say it on the pre-show. Is I this is the first time you and I had the opportunity to speak.
Yep.
I see you in the community space. I see you on Twitter. I see you on LinkedIn. I see you speaking at certain things, but we've never spoken. And when I reached out to you, I was like, she might even just ignore this. I don't know. But she didn't. So
no way.
I mean, you don't know. Like people just either don't look at LinkedIn, or maybe you don't know what they do. And so I appreciate you coming on. This has been really good. And my goal is to have you on again a number of times. And by the way, you did say that Elizabeth pretty well, Kinsey. So she's director of Slack communities. Is that right?
Queen Elizabeth. She is, yes, making moves over at Slack. Yes.
She is, and I saw her at I think she was at some event or something thought I saw it on Twitter. I don't know, but we'll have to talk about that later. But maybe we'll have the three of us on at some point, since you're already friends, and I'm sure the conversation is just going to go splendid. If you're open.
I think that would be a great idea.
All right. Well,
I'm saying yes for her.
Yeah, text her right after this and say, hey, we're on Detzel's podcast here. So, well, it's Erica. That was Elizabeth. Jesus. Erica, it's been really good to have you on the show. So thank you so much. My name is Chris Detzel. Thank you for coming over for another Peers Over Beers. And you can say your name.
Erica Moss. Thanks, y'all.
Erica Moss. Thank you.